Well, thank you, Alistair, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a rare pleasure for me to be addressing a conference in my own constituency. And my own constituency was originally slightly larger, Inverness, East Nairn and Lochaber, and it had at least three distinctions. It had in Scotland the highest mountain, it had the deepest loch, and it certainly had and still has the most intelligent electorate of all. But it's a real pleasure to be here because timber transport is hugely important to me. I have always been very interested in the timber sector of the economy in Scotland for various reasons, having been friendly with one of your number, David Solman, who's here somewhere, and a close friend of ours, Cameron Aitken, who runs Gilmore and Aitken, who are hardwood importers operating in Alexandria, as some of you will know. And from them I learned a great deal about the sector. And representing this constituency, I live about 1,000 metres away from BSW's Votive Garden plant, so I can actually hear it, which is fine. And we also have Gordon's at Nairn, and we have James Jones along at Forestry, and we have the port and harbour at Inverness, which of course is associated with many aspects of the timber sector, with many house builders, and therefore that all has given me, as a constituency MSP, I hope, a reasonably rounded understanding of the importance of the whole sector to Scottish economy, and in particular the economy of rural Scotland. And it would be remiss of me not to mention a significant figure in every way, Ali Ferguson here from Fort William, who we've worked with for many years and who's been behind some of the most exciting economic projects in Scotland, which is a great thing. So I'm here to talk about particular timber transport today, and I gather that the turnout today, Alistair, has been exceptional, and in particular there's many hauliers, there's many drivers here today, and that's excellent because you're the guys that do the hard work. If it wasn't for you, there wouldn't be a timber sector, there wouldn't be sawmills, there wouldn't be houses built out of timber, and people would not be able to enjoy all the many other things they take for granted. And I thought that the recent programme, The Forest, did give some insight into the life that you lead and its challenges and the way of life. And I just wanted to thank you all to start off with for the excellent work that you do for the country. So let's give a round of applause for the hauliers amongst the audience, ladies and gentlemen. There you are. I bet you that hasn't happened to many of you before, apart from the time you bought a round at the local pub, but there we are. But no, seriously, you do a great job, and it's one where we need to attract more young people to follow in your footsteps, and I'll come back to that. And of course, the sector is hugely important to the Scottish economy. I mean, it's worth £1,000 million a year, and it supports an enormous number of jobs, and particularly in rural Scotland. Just this week, we passed the Forestry and Land Management Scotland Bill, and it was passed unanimously in the Scottish Parliament. And I'm proud to have been the Cabinet Secretary that has seen this legislation passed. It will improve a lot of aspects and the practical aspects about dealing with forestry, particularly things that may be a bit boring to the outside world, like felling licenses, temporary stopping notices, and other practicalities that will improve substantially the way in which the work is done. It also contains a duty to promote sustainable forest management and to produce a forestry strategy, as well as putting in place a modern, flexible, and more effective regulatory regime for felling. And I think it does represent a step forward. Although I do have to say this without giving away any state secrets, I wouldn't like to go through the process again anytime soon. But hopefully that won't happen. Now that that's out of the way, that paves the way for us to go on to promote the timber sector from nursery to house building and everything in between. So getting timber to market can be challenging, and it can be challenging because of transport issues. And we have, for a relatively small country, a very long road network with 2,200 miles of trunk roads, 33,000 miles of local authority maintained A, B, C and U class roads. and over half of which are very minor unclassified roads. And of course, the volume of timber being harvested adjacent to these roads is rising steadily, so it's vital to try to balance the competing pressures that we have. Now, I've become well aware of the work that is done, led by yourself, Alistair, but coordinated and led at a local level by the regional timber transport groups and by local authorities. And I wanted to say that I really do appreciate the way in which the forum and the regional groups work together. I think this is a key asset. The Scottish Government has got complete confidence in you and the work that you do, and that's extremely important. I just wanted to communicate my thanks to everybody that's involved in these regional groups, and to say that I want you to carry on doing this work, and we want to hear more from you about what solutions we can provide at a regional level. Those of you who are working in Argyll or the Highlands or the south of Scotland will know better than any minister will ever do what needs to be done. And therefore, I want to hear more about what needs to be done. And I think imaginative and solutions can be found in some cases. I'm open to considering them. And indeed, over lunch, Jamie Farker, Alistair and myself were discussing this. And I believe John Dugan this morning gave some ideas about different approaches that could be taken. I just wanted to say that to you. But I'm also aware, and I've had some discussions this morning about technological advances that assist the drivers in the work that you do, such as low ground pressure systems, GPS tracking, and I had a shot at the goggles that you wear in order to load the lorries without having physically to get onto the back of the lorry yourself. So perhaps the goggles may make more attractive the proposition of doing your job to the younger generation, including my 9-year-old daughter or blokes of that age who are attracted by the computer world and everything to do with IT. But these advances, I don't think, are at all understood by the public. And I think if we can get this message across, that could well help us more readily recruit children to take an interest in pursuing a career in forestry. The new FISA Forestry Haulage Safety Manual is required reading, and it lays out best practice, and everyone's safety must, of course, be the fundamental starting point. So I wanted to say a bit about what the Scottish Government is doing, and of course we support the Strategic Timber Transport Fund. Last year, in response to a strong case made by the Timber Transport Forum, I made an additional £5 million available to the Strategic Timber Transport Fund, and that brought the budget up from 2.85 million to 7.85 million to co-fund projects. And of course, when I say co-fund, I mean that came from the Scottish Government, but of course it is supplemented by contributions from local authorities throughout the country. And that's another area where, of course, there is always more work that can be done. But, I have found that the interest in those local authorities where timber is particularly important is positive. There is support from officials, there is support from councillors, and I think that is a good thing. And I think Sam McNaughton is here somewhere here today, who's been a friend of the sector. So there are many friends that you have in local authorities, and part of my task is to get around to visit local authorities and to make sure that we're all working as a Team Scotland in order to promote forestry. And indeed, together with Joe O'Hara, I spent some time visiting local authorities for the purposes of working together to identify the best places for new plantations. And with John Dugan and others in the Forestry Commission to work together, National Government, Forestry Commission and local authorities, to do more work to try to identify such suitable areas for new plantations and identify to a deeper extent the practical problems or challenges, for example, community support, timber transport access issues and other matters at an earlier stage. So the Timber Transport Fund is pretty important. The result was that over £11 million was spent on 50 road projects this year to improve the minor rural road network throughout Scotland, and the Timberlink shipping service is also extremely important because this takes timber lorries off the roads between Argyll and Ayrshire in places like Lochalan, I believe. So that too is extremely important. And this has been the largest annual investment in the Strategic Timber Transport Fund to date. But of course we have to look forward and not back, and therefore I'm very pleased to announce today that I've again made available for next year the additional £5 million of funding for the Strategic Timber Transport Fund. So next year, as well as this year, there will be £7.85 million available to support both Timberlink and the Strategic Timber Transport Scheme. And I can assure you, although I'm off script here a wee bit, as I do from time to time, that as long as I'm Cabinet Secretary, I will be intent to try to make sure that this level of funding, if it possibly can be maintained, will be maintained. And indeed it would be preferable if it were possible to budget on a longer term basis, as most of the projects with which you're involved are projects that take not 1 year to realise, but very often several years to realise. So that is work in progress, as they say, with my colleagues. So I hope, ladies and gentlemen, this investment will help to sustain the momentum that has been built up over the last year and deliver even more practical improvements to our road transport system. And if I were a driver driving along roads with potholes and bumps and getting jolted around every day in your working day, I'd be pretty fed up with that. And I just wanted to say we realise that in the Scottish Government, and that's one of the reasons why we've given the budget an increase from 2.8 to 7.85, an increase which is pretty substantial, and I will do my best to make sure that that continues. We do have other grant funding available for other purposes to enable modal shift, to try to get some timber transport onto the railways. And I know that this has been the topic of your conference today, and Frank Roach and others have been heavily involved in this matter for a long, long time, decades. Is that right, Frank?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought so. He looks a bit younger than that, but there we are. So this is challenging because the economics of rail freight schemes are not just the easiest, and perhaps that's been a deterrent. And I think perhaps some of the commercial players here will have been a bit sceptical over the years about whether it can be made to work. We are looking at opportunities at the moment and working very hard to see if one in particular can be brought across the line. And I think if that happens, there would be tremendous knock-on benefits. The assistance available for this include freight facilities grants, modal shift revenue, and the waterborne freight grant, and the Scottish Strategic Rail Freight Investment Fund. So there is grant funding available, and we are working with the private sector to see what can be done, and I hope that progress will be made sooner rather than later. The Scottish Government can't do it all. I do think as a Cabinet Secretary and Minister for 11 years that things work best in Scotland when there's a partnership approach between the public and private sectors. That's when things can really motor along fairly quickly. And the private sector is now the dominant sector supplying timber. So money from a range of resources is required to maintain the road network assets in a usable condition. Obviously, we can't upgrade every single road at the same time. There needs to be a prioritisation process. And again, I would be keen for the ideas from the regional groups about how best we do that. I think that we need to work together closely to see how we can improve all these matters. In summary, the forestry sector in Scotland continues to grow. I think that you have a very strong public support, and I am doing my best to see that that continues. The local authorities are increasingly playing an active part as partners with the private sector and the Forestry Commission and Forest Enterprise. And road haulage is always going to be needed, even if we succeed to some extent with modal shift towards rail. Now, in coming to a close, I'm conscious that very rarely, if ever, do I hear the words that, Minister, what a shame your speech was too short, or as I'll tell you a story, which a true story actually before I finish, about my daughter Natasha, who's 9, but a couple of years ago, the alarm went off one morning. It's my phone, and the alarm makes the noise of the duck, quack, 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 like that. You can imagine it. And I went off, and I forgot to switch the damn thing off. So Natasha came into the room, and she said, having been irritated by this for some time, she said, "Daddy, will you shut the duck up?" I think this has been recorded, actually. I was careful what I said there. So, in closing, could I just thank everybody here for the great work that you're doing. It's very important to Scotland. I'm aware of that. My colleagues in the Cabinet are aware of that. Otherwise, they wouldn't have supported my pleas for the extra funding. We will make sure the funding is used to best advantage. We will grow more trees. We will support our sawmillers, our panel product sector. We will see more houses built out of timber. We will encourage more young people to take the courses that are required. We will do our best to support the colleges and other institutions that are important to bring people forward into this most important sector in the rural economy in many ways. And I'll continue to do everything I can to help you achieve even greater success. Thank you very much indeed.